In the last episode, you saw us planking the boat and making it to where it's kind of a boat. This one, you're gonna see us smooth it out and fair it, get some fiberglass and epoxy on there.
Finish up the paint, get some color on it, and then take on the biggest challenge, which is flipping the boat, which makes us so nervous, and we can't wait to show how it went.
And Tommy might even help.
I refer to this section of the boat build as the drywall phase because it reminds me so much of the drywalling process. We mixed up a batch of 2-part epoxy filler, and we went down first along the planking bottom and filled in every screw hole, which there are hundreds. We also filled in the seams with a mixture of epoxy and sawdust. We were so ready at this point to just see the boat flipped over. It's kind of crazy. You spend all this time looking at the boat upside down, and other than getting on the floor and sticking our heads through the crack to look up, we haven't actually seen the boat in the other direction. So we're really looking forward to that. And we're thinking about those kind of things as we're filling in all of these areas and getting the boring stuff done that I call the drywall phase. I skipped over to a different product to try out, and this is by Total Boat. I believe it's called Total Fair. And what I like about it is it's a 2-part, and one side is blue and the other side is yellow. So you can clearly see when you have it mixed up, it turns to a nice green color. You can tell when it's evenly mixed. The 2-part products are great because they cure quickly and you can sand them the same day. Cameron and I got a little bored, so we went for some coordinated sanding. Next, it was time to move on to the sides, and I mixed another large clump of Total Boat, Total Fair up, and I actually didn't realize that Tommy even visited me on this video. It's funny, the things you don't notice. Back to drywall things, I feel like this is a drywall type thing that I'm building up and feathering out the seam so that it can be invisible. I applied a piece of solid mahogany on the back side of the transom, and I had to flesh it up a bit. So first I used my power planer and I put a piece of 1/4-inch plywood as a spacer to make sure I didn't go too deep. The second time I felt confident enough using it that I didn't need it. And then I followed up with a side and used my jigsaw first to get it close, followed by the router to finish it up. This worked out really nicely. I'm putting solid mahogany on the back because that will be what we call clear. It will be like a stained mahogany finished color on the back. Finished it up with the plane, and it was smooth as can be. This is something that Cameron and I made out of boards and dowels. It's a way to put sandpaper strips on the boards, and it does a great job of sanding over a long, wide space without digging in gouges. It's really easy to do gouges when you're doing a lot of sanding, and this makes sure that they stay faired across the surface and the planes. We go at an angle so we don't dig in, always on the surface, and did a great job. I made sure I sanded between coats. That way I got rid of the grit that we used before. We started at a rough grit and moved up to, I believe, a 180 grit is what we went up to, starting at 60. We're getting closer to the fiberglassing process, and the first step of this is to seal up all the plywood and all the materials that I've used so far. And to do that, I mixed up a clear batch of epoxy without any fillers, and I just went around the boat and put an initial coat, including the back. You can see the sneak peek of what the mahogany looks like with a clear finish on it. My goal was just to go around the whole boat and get a nice, even, clear epoxy finish so that we could seal it and prepare it for fiberglass. After letting the epoxy cure for a few days, it was time to start the fiberglassing process. And this is fiberglass cloth. My daughter Madison stopped by to help out for a bit, and we marked the contours of the boat and started cutting the fiberglass to be fairly close to the profile of the boat with just a little bit of overlap. The idea is to start with the bottom first, and then the sides can overlap. It was a big help having a second person to work the scissors while I held it in place. We started with the back, and you can see how magical this happens. As you put the epoxy on there, it just melts into the surface and basically becomes invisible. After doing the bottom and the rear transom of the boat and then the sides, we covered the entire thing with another coat of epoxy, and this just really seals it up and makes it all one unit. The purpose of the fiberglass is to keep the wood from ever wanting to crack or check. It also gives it a whole nother layer of strength and protection. One of the more interesting things of the fiberglass process is if this was going to be stained sides, or they call bright, you still follow the same process with the fiberglass. The only thing about the fiberglass is they say that in the sunlight you can sometimes see the weave of the fiber, so it's not completely clear, but it's almost completely clear. For that reason, I will not be using fiberglass on the bow of the boat. We are going to be using varnish, and it just may need to be updated every once in a while. We let that cure for a few days, and then I came back and lightly sanded the boat, and I recognized some places that were inconsistent and needed to be filled. So I mixed up a batch of clear epoxy and added my own powder mixture of filler, and basically made my own very fine, almost call it drywall mud again, but it's an epoxy layer. The fillers make it a lot easier to sand versus a regular epoxy, and also gives it some body. And my goal here was to create a glaze coat that was slightly overbuilt, that I could come back and sand it to perfection. And this worked out really nicely. Sometimes I wish Tommy the shop cat had thumbs, because he totally wants to help, it seems like, at all times, but he just can't do a lot, except for give us support. And after what seemed like forever, I am on my final sand, and I know this doesn't look great, but it's all about making it smooth. It's going to be a solid color. We just got to make it look perfect. So I'm starting with my RO150 sander, which is aggressive. I put a thick sponge pad on it so that I wouldn't over sand in an area, and I just kept it moving the whole time. This is really important because this sander is aggressive, but it also saved time because the epoxy and additive mixture I made was really hard. Cameron came after school and went around the entire boat with our safer option, which is the long sanding block, and it makes it nice, smooth, and even. Finally, we're at a step where we can see some solid color, and I was actually excited to do this step because it's quick reward, and it's just applying a high build oil-based primer to the whole surface of the boat. And this is the first time we get to see it appearing to be a one-piece structure without a lot of complication. Actually makes it look very simple and like it's not a big deal. Hey, here's a fun fact for you. Modern day boats are made from fiberglass hulls, and they're placed into a mold, and when they're finished in the mold and they pull them out, they basically look like what we have spent all this time building. This is the reason why the wooden boat industry died off by the 60s. It's just so much faster to build a boat hull out of fiberglass. There are still wooden boat manufacturers, but they charge a premium for their work because of the amount of labor that goes into building them, as you can see. A majority of the wooden boat companies were located around Michigan, and they used a lot of car parts for the boats. So a lot of the boats, like Chris Crafts and things you see out on the water still, have car steering wheels and car motors. And I find that it's really interesting how the boating industry adopted some car practices for the wooden boats. There's also wooden boat manufacturers in other parts of the world. A lot of them are in Europe. My favorite one in Italy is Riva Boats, and they specialize in really high-end wooden boats, and they've been seen on James Bond, and they've carried the royal family, and they still make wooden boats today. They've also moved into yachts, and they make huge mega yachts as well, but I'd love to see the history of Riva. They partnered with Lamborghini back in the day to put Lamborghini engines into their wooden power boats, and it's just really cool. There's some things on YouTube about it, and I just find it so interesting. Okay, back to the boat. I was feeling like I was applying the finish as fast as I'm showing it in this frame because it was curing so fast. I recall that when I was putting the right side on, the left side had already cured. I had to become a semi-expert on boat coatings, and one of the biggest characteristics of boat coatings are they submerged in water or are they topside? And for the sides of the boat, it's topside paint and it's bottom paint for below the waterline. So to establish the waterline, I used my laser, and the plans tell how far down from the certain frame is to what the water line is. And then since the boat is sitting completely level, as it will be when it's in the water, the green laser let me know where to place the tape. And from there I applied the first coat of our topside paint, which was a Total Boat product, and I was just really careful to put a nice even coat and brush after every one to take out the brush lines. And this is called tipping, and this process worked really great. I just kept moving down the side of the boat and didn't try to get it in one coat. I knew I was going to have two, so it's a little semi-transparent at this point, but it went on really nice and it was a good looking product. The next thing on the list was to create the skeg, which is what I call a shark fin at the bottom of the boat, is the best way to explain it. It's a 2-inch tall strip of wood that runs from the transom all the way up towards the stem in the center of the boat, and I assume it helps the boat track when under power and turning. It's specified to use a 1-inch wide piece of mahogany, and I had 3/4, so I thought I'd laminate 2 pieces together and then plane it down to get to that 1-inch size. So it took a lot of glue and a lot of clamps to get that cooking on top of the boat to prepare for Cameron when he came, and the plan was that we would cut it to size and shape and get it installed once it cured. To prepare for the second coat of the topside finish, I went across the entire surface, sanding lightly just to remove any imperfections, any bumps, raises. Wanted to get a really smooth finish, so I took my time sanding it. I did let this sit for several days before sanding because it stayed tacky. It's an oil-based product and it took a little while for it to cure. The roll and tipping method is even more important on the second coat because you're getting close to your final finish. And the way we do this is just basically roll out about a 2-foot area, and then I start from the top, which is actually the bottom of the boat, and I just pull vertically down and lightly, like the brush barely gets any paint on it, and it just smooths it out so that it can float and it appears to be a sprayed on finish look. The brush needs to be a very fine texture at the bottom, the flagging of the bristles. You can see here how I'm just lightly, while the paint is still wet, dragging down so it still has time to float out. If you wait too late, you could actually put grooves into it and it wouldn't be able to smooth out. So you got to play around with it a little bit and you learn where that is. But the key is just not to put on too much before you start doing this brushing technique. While the paint was still wet on the second coat, I started pulling the blue tape off so that it wouldn't cure and possibly pull the finish up. Something to point out about the method that I used was I'm trying to get the actual water line for my stripe. Some people follow the chine and the boat actually color goes up to a point at the front and the stem, and that works and you don't have to use a laser to establish a line, but I kind of prefer it where the solid color is seen all the way across and you don't see a white section on the front of the stem. Another point is that the water line is actually a little lower than you see here. I'm allowing for a color stripe that's going to be red, and the bottom of the red stripe will be the actual water line. So I actually moved the water line up about 2 inches for the blue so that the red could also be seen from the water. The transom of the boat will be a buildup of clear epoxy layers, so I thought I would go ahead and put one on there to start that process. At this point you can still feel the ridges from the fiberglass cloth, but eventually it will be built up to smooth. With Cameron back in the shop, it was time to go back to that skeg that we had glued up and set on top of the boat. And the first step was to cut it to the 2 inches, which is slightly angled, that specifies in the plans, and the track saw works great for this. We also used it to cut the taper shape on the front. To install the skeg, it's set into a bed of thickened epoxy. So I mixed up a really thick layer, so thick I had to use this glue spreader to dab it into place. I can't help thinking at this point that setting this straight and not crooked is probably really important. The last thing I want to do is go down the water about 30 miles an hour at an angle. So we really took a lot of time to make sure that we were sitting on our center line. I believe we even used the laser to mark this. You can see here where we're embedding it in the epoxy and how it squeezes out on each side, and that gives me confidence that we have full coverage. Here's a shot of the full shape. It starts out really thin on the front and gets taller as it goes back with a nice taper on the end. The plans called out the exact location by measuring off the transom. Next up was the bottom paint, and I'm going with a white, and not really a lot to say about this. It's mainly just rolling it on, and I used plastic on the sides where I wouldn't get white speckles all over the place. It was Saturday, and Cameron and I decided it would be a great idea to get the cradle completed, and that's what the boat sits on when it gets flipped over. This is definitely a two-person job. This was a challenge. There's not really a lot of information out there. There's a lot of different ways that people do them, but after looking on all the forums, I decided to go this route. We made a rectangle that seemed like it would support the boat from front to back and wouldn't be unstable. Our technique was to use a level to make sure that it was sitting absolutely in the right location. Then I put temporary legs on each side to support it with clamps while I scribed the bottom side contour against the 2x6s. And this would allow the boat to sit in a little V notch and be stable. We weren't sure if this would work, but it seemed like it would, so we thought we would try. And this is the moment that we find out if all of the cutting on all the scribe lines is right. And when we set it in place, it looked level, but then we verified by placing the level along the boat and everything looked perfect. It's now time to work on the boot stripe, which is the color stripe that runs along the bottom of the boat. And here I'm actually marking the actual water line. I purposely made the blue be higher than the water line so I could allow for a red stripe to be shown before it hits the water line. For the final part of the line, I used a green tape that is flexible and does not allow paint to bleed easily underneath it. For the boot stripe, I'm using a red oil-based topside enamel. We're getting so close to our attempted flip of the boat and we're so excited. So we thought we'd go ahead and add legs to our cradle that we had made, and our plan is to add wheels to this so that the boat is movable to some extent around the shop as we work on different areas. While we still had the cradle sitting on the boat, Cameron added these cross members that match the contour of the boat. We don't have to do any marketing, we just screwed them in place as is, and they provide a lot more support for the weight of the boat. The cradle is now finished, and we actually had to put it outside because our shop was so full there was nowhere to place it. And while it was outside, we may or may not have rode down the shop driveway, and I tried to find that footage, but I can't locate it, but it's out there on Instagram somewhere. It's finally the day of the flip, and Cameron's adding carpet to the cradle to prepare for his recruited friends that are coming over to help us hopefully flip the boat successfully.
I'm about to save you 30 minutes of time of the part we're not going to show you. All my friends got here, it's time to flip the boat, but it's a little heavier than we thought it was going to be. We then realized it was still screwed down to the concrete, so we unscrewed it from the concrete, and it was still too heavy, and then we realized we were picking up the form with it. So we unscrewed it from the frames, we got all that done, and now it's time to watch the magic happen. Guys, this time counts.
This time we're doing it.
First try.
First try.
Oh, that's way better.
Up in the air. Right. So now we're gonna go down on this side. Let's just start low. Oh, it's not out under here. Yeah. Well, that's bigger than I remember. There we go.
Clear.
All right, so we can start lowering this down now on this side. Keep going forward just a little bit more.
Let's keep pulling that line.
Yes, we don't want it to set on the weight of it. Let's keep holding it up, holding it up.
Okay. That backhand goes over there.
Hey, we could set it on here and then flip it around after it's on that thing and never send it on the side.
That's not a bad idea.
But let's just see how it raises up. Okay. All right. Now,
Or you need to, do you want to get the bottom now, Tyler? Yeah, maybe you can get down here. Everyone in the back, you ready to kind of hold it as we walk it down towards you?
Yeah, ready? Like, get back.
Yeah. Hold on, you need someone else on this side.
I can come back here.
Like right here, camera? Yeah, you can get in the middle. And won't pick it up.
How many people do you have on?
We're good. My head was going to hit the chisel. Why? Take it. Yeah, okay, so good. You can let go. Get out. Guys, hold on, don't move. Okay. Up. Light towards us. Okay, hold on. Let's roll the form towards you guys.
I gotta go.
Who's got the form?
I have it. I'm pushing it towards you all. Okay, now we're going up more, up higher. Back. Okay. Down. Now we just have to center it up.
Okay. Put it back here. Just pull this mat back.
Okay. You're all in. Move over.
Okay.
It's on the center right now, Dad.
Pull it back this way right here. Yay!
Everybody clap.
Awesome.
Thanks for following along with this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't seen how we got to this point, there's 2 episodes before this one and many more to come.
The next episode we'll be covering how we did the bow framing as well as some of the steering column adjustments, wiring, that kind of thing. And we have a lot more videos to come. Thank you for following along. Tune in. We got more to come. Meow. Don't do that.